All right. Well, we're at 2:31, so I want to be able to give you as much as I can and to give you some time as we go through to ask questions and chat. I'll apologize right from the get-go that the visual, the screen feed, the screencast is not necessarily the best, so I'm trying to make it work as best as I can using a single monitor. So we'll just kind of see how this plays out. So I'm facilitating the session. I have three lovely people who helped to build the slide deck with me as we went through this over the last little bit. My name is Angela Sanford. I'm the coordinator of distributed learning with the Department of Education. I look after the Nova Scotia Virtual School and the Correspondence Studies programs. And the three teachers that are listed here, Colette Rennie, Melissa Boudreau, and Nathan Cormier, all come from the Strait Regional Center for Education, and are all, Melissa and Nathan are teachers with us in the Nova Scotia Virtual School, and Colette is our teacher lead in those programs. Melissa is a French teacher, and Nathan does math sciences for us. So this is a compilation of our thoughts and our feedback based on virtual school, a little bit from correspondence studies, a little bit of what we've encountered during COVID, and hopefully a whole lot of useful tools for you as we go through. We'd hope to have some opportunity to have a little bit of engagement, so there'll be an opportunity later on to get live in the chat and share your thoughts. Please ask any questions or make any comments as you want as we go through, and I will do my best to watch those as we're following along with those at the same time. Colette, Melissa, and Nathan, of course, are all on summer vacation and hopefully relaxing and enjoying a little bit of a break before we jump back into virtual school this fall. So Jennifer Saravallo has a wonderful book about online learning and speaks quite well to the assessment piece as well. So you're going to see some quotes from her throughout this presentation. And the first one is that offering options will be crucial in providing universal access. This is no different than in a classroom. Wherever you may be, options for students are key to being able to access and support their learning in the best way that we can. So be mindful that all of the conversation here is going to link back to our assessment policy through the department. And as well, it's going to speak to the inclusive ed policy, accessibility policies, and so on, because we want the best for our students all the way around. And CAST is a wonderful group organization that speaks well to the universal design for learning. So let's just start with that. Let's start with what the assessments should look like. This is taken directly from the assessment, what assessments should look like when learning from home during our COVID piece. And it speaks as a true testament to what the assessment policy reads. So assessments need to contribute to student learning, right? They're not setups to see if you can catch a student in what they know or don't know. They need to be valid and reliable, fair, right? Speaking to an assessment that we had recently, looking at one, I was working with a student online doing a virtual assessment with this student from another country who had never been, first of all, had never been to Canada, but had never been to any place where there was a skidoo or a snowmobile or whatever somebody might call it. And in the process of answering the question, he asked me to jump in and help him explain what that was about, because that piece had thrown him off. So it's thinking about the language of our assessments and how we present them so that they are inclusive to all. They're planned, they're purposeful, inclusive, equitable. Those speak to the same pieces. They're not the gotchas, right? They align with the expected learning outcomes, your instructional approaches, individual student learning. Students have had practice and opportunity within these within the assessment pieces so that they understand and know what to do and how to address them and how to work through them. They provide students with multiple opportunities to demonstrate their understanding and application of concepts and skills related to the expected learning outcomes. So they're looking at your targets, thinking about how can that assessment meet the target of the course or the subject area or the topic or theme that you're looking at. They provide ongoing information about student learning. They're not one-offs, right? They're intended to support students, to guide next steps, to provide feedback, and yes, grading, but all of those pieces come together to support our learners. And they provide ongoing information about the student learning that is meaningful, accessible, and is communicated to parents and students in a variety of ways. And again, there's no surprises for students or parents or guardians. Everyone should know where they are and what to expect and what they're doing as they go through. So I'm going to jump ahead to correspondence studies and year-end exams. So when COVID hit a year and a half ago, the correspondence studies team was faced with a monumental piece to almost a cavern to cross over. To that point, the exams were exams. That's the word for them. They weren't called assessments, and some still aren't. And these exams are the only opportunity for correspondence students to do the final piece and be known that they're the person that's doing the work. So prior to that, students may be working in an online Moodle format, or they may have PDF copies of courses and materials, and that they're emailing back and forth with their markers to get feedback and grading as they're going through. So these lessons and assignments are a continuation. For some courses, they're broken into units, some they're broken into lessons, whatever it might be. The culmination of all of that is the final exam. Students are provided with a hard copy, paper pencil copy of an exam. And in doing that, they have to bring ID to show who they are, because that's the first time anybody has seen them and to know who they might be. And it's our way of ensuring that the course has been done by this student. So what happened when all of a sudden people couldn't go and be supervised in an exam format? You know, there was no place to house these. There were people were not available to meet total strangers to be able to do these supervised exams, and we came to a complete shutdown. We had to revamp the entire system and think about, how are we going to process this? How are we going to provide this opportunity for students? And between using Google Slides and Google Meet, we were able to come up with a great opportunity where we transposed those exams or final assessments for some have changed now, into this online Google slideshow. And this slide deck is not able to be altered because of the way it's set up. And then students were brought on to a virtual meeting. They met their supervisor virtually. They had a quick relationship building conversation piece about what it was expected in the formatting, in the assessment. And they were off to town looking to work on their final assessment for the subject areas. And we trialed it with a couple of students in math and science first, then worked our way through. And we even do the provincial grade 10 and grade 11, or sorry, grade 10 math and grade 10 English exams in the same manner, virtually. And so now we have many options available. So now that we have students that are back to schools, we had students who are able to go to other supervised areas, and we have students around the world in our correspondence studies programs. They have the option. They can come into our office and do it in person. They can do it online. They can do it with a supervisor of their own with a hard copy. They can do it virtually from their home. They can do it virtually from their home in another country. So COVID was really a great move forward for us, so that we could actually create this in a manner that allowed us to have such opportunities for students and to give them such success in that area. So now, to look at those pieces and how those were done, we didn't want to take the time today to spend on looking at how to directly create the Google slide deck so that it can happen. So I'm going to share with you in a little bit a link to a Google folder that has some materials in that. It has some notes from this. It'll have an upload of this presentation when the time comes as well. So, all right. And just before I go on, any questions about the concept of the online virtual exam at that point? Nope. Okay. So the other thing that happened was we had our Nova Scotia Virtual School students. And the Nova Scotia Virtual School is an extension of classrooms. Students still go to school every day. They still go to their daily scheduled courses every day. It just happens that one of them is a scheduled virtual period. And during that virtual period, they would participate in one of our virtual courses. Up until COVID again, what happened when classrooms, when there was, say, math assessment or an English assessment or a Canadian history assessment, whatever it might be, students would be collected together in their classroom setting with a teacher supervisor in the school. That was great until COVID. And so teachers had to learn to adjust even in our virtual school, because up until that point, all of those assessments were being done. Any final assessments or exams that were happening still within the schools. That couldn't happen anymore either. And so our teachers were very resilient, and they faced adversity with great ease and figuring out ways to support students by moving to projects, moving to presentations, to portfolios, to online assessments, whatever it might be, whatever suited their course material and the outcomes for that course. So that's kind of a little bit of a background of where we're going with all of these pieces. All right. So within correspondence studies, some of the concerns that happened as we met this online learning environment were security and integrity. How could we make sure that the exam, especially the provincial exam for math and English, were secure? They weren't going to be shared with anyone else. How are we going to figure out who could supervise? Because now all of a sudden, instead of having one teacher supervising, several people within one space, we had many people. And at some points in the breadth of our year is a full calendar year, not a school year. June, just like in a school year, is very full when it comes to doing exams and final assessments. And so supervision was a concern. How were students going to access these exams, these final assessments? What were they going to do? What supports could we offer? And would this be adopted afterwards? Was a one-off and where it went? So we come back to the security and integrity. Security of the exam happens with the Google slide. As I said, we can build it so that the exam is not able to be changed and altered in any way, where we create a JPEG that becomes the background or of the exam page itself. Then from there, we overlay it with text boxes. The students can write their answers in, type their answers in, draw their answers in. And that allowed for the integrity of the course. We were able to come back and look at the outcomes of those courses and really focus on what the essential learnings were. When it came into accessibility of those courses, it actually allowed for things to open up for our students. Now they could access websites that would support them in their learning. So in our math courses, they would have been bringing calculators to it. Now they could actually use Desmos. Now we had an option to bring in readings from other websites as part of the assessment piece, rather than just a physical paper copy, which is what they had previously. So it actually opened up our accessibility there. And in opening up that accessibility, it opened up our support system for them. So I've got other people in the house here as well. So sorry about that. So when we opened up the support systems for them, students now we could actually look at it and say, okay, let's chunk this exam. Whereas in the past, if a student came into our office to do their 2.5-hour paper copy exam, they were that's where we were at. And if they had a modification that was allowing them to have extra time, it could lead up to a 4-hour exam, depending on what was there. And that's not fair to any student or any person to have to do that. So by moving to these online pieces, we were able to start chunking exams for students who needed exams chunked or final assessments chunked. I speak to exams because that's the CSP that was there in place. So we were able to start chunking them. We were able to start using accessibility tools where they could read to text, text to read. Again, they could use other websites that might help support. We could inlay videos, right? So there were all sorts of these things that allowed us to really expand on what our students needed to support them throughout their materials. Supervision has been a challenge at times because we can have upwards of 20 students doing final assessments on a single day. But it actually brought together our department and many schools and regions as well, because now we're offering this virtual opportunity where people don't have to be in place. They can be working on something else while they're supervising this final assessment for a student. And students, we've had students who've actually worked from home, been able to, one gentleman actually held his baby and kind of sang to the baby while he was working on his final assessment. And that brought him great stress relief. He was quite happy to do that. And because we could watch what was going on, there were no questions about what was happening. And so it's allowed for supervision to grow, and it's brought together the volunteer group as a great support team for one another to be able to do that. And adoption, it was quite easy to see that this was something we needed to adopt as we moved forward. And again, even some of it has been adopted by our NSVS teachers and doing similar practices. This past spring, that adoption changed a bit for our NSVS teachers with the return to school. After having made the comment with our NSVS students that we would not be having final assessments in the same mode as we had previous, there would be no such piece. And the students were brought back into schools. It allowed students to actually have a variety of assessments rather than just exams as well. So the adoption has been quite positively taken, and we're still building on it and working on new means for bringing that final assessment piece together for the distance learning education. So then we go back to Fisher, Frey, Smith, and Hattie. Setting is not the determining factor in learning. Doesn't matter if you're learning it from home, if you're learning it from in the school. It's about how you access the material, how students access the material, and how we support them and give them feedback and quality feedback in a timely manner so that they know how to progress. So those are the key pieces as we go through. One thing that we noticed, and I alluded to this in my slide previous, many commonly used assessments and measures of student growth are impractical or invalid when used virtually or remotely. Doing it's very possible to do a multiple choice test, exam, assessment online, not necessarily practical. Timely, easy, yes, but do we get the full feel for what the student can do? Not necessarily. A lot of our questions in our final assessments had to be changed, had to be altered, had to be moved and revamped. Is there anything wrong with that? Not at all. It allows us to get back into the depth of what's going on in the course, within the outcomes, within the addressing of those, and how we're going to target the learning. So some of our teachers found that because of the big change of moving to an online assessment, there may have been a little more upfront work. Things had to be changed from their previous assessment tools that they had used. But I would say all have found that student reception to those online assessments has also been very positive and very worth that move to the online assessment tool. Back one here. So some of the things that our teachers have looked at when it comes to doing those assessments is using Flipgrid, using an e-form like a Google form, right? If you're accustomed to using Moodle, there's lots of tools that you can use within Moodle to create your own quizzes and assessments and wikis and whatever podcasts, the whole piece that's there. So many different and valued ways to get to the same pieces of information that you're looking for. And by giving students those options and choice, they can really feel for themselves and attest to what they know and can show and can do. Right? So that's the focus of where we're going with this. Being able to use shared documents so that there's opportunities for students to work together on perhaps even just a question, or maybe it's a portfolio of things that have happened in the classroom or in their online learning. Interviews, great way to have an interview with students is to use the Moodle format, if you're using that, or your Google Hangout, Google Classroom, and have an opportunity to have a one-on-one interview with your students. It only takes a couple of moments to assess some questions and get deep into that learning with the student and be able to make some anecdotal records of that, providing them with some feedback and some grading. Great opportunity for them to cast videos of what they're showing, do photo stories, to use whatever tools that they might have in their hands and their pockets to be able to show you, look, this is what I can do when I'm working on my own. And it's a great way to see that they're transferring that knowledge into other opportunities as well. So a couple of people came on in the beginning. I just kind of said, what's the experience you have with assessments? So my question comes out to, how would you do it? How would you take one of your courses? How would you take one of your previous assignments, previous assessments? How could you think about moving that online and into a virtual world? Quite often the concept is there, and it might just be a little maneuvering into what it might be. So I'm gonna hold off on that a moment. I'm hoping you think about that as it percolates. We're gonna talk about a couple of other things, and then I'm gonna ask you to come back to that and maybe share some thoughts on how you might have an assessment that you could transform, or how you've already done that, or how you're already using virtual assessments in your classrooms. So keep that percolating in the back of your mind. We're gonna hit the chat room or chat space in a moment and share some of those ideas. So three of the things that come up this morning, two of our virtual school teachers did a session on teaching the arts virtually. So we looked at IB Music, and we looked at grade 11 art and advanced art. So they did a wonderful job of showing how those courses can easily be taught in a very well-defined way by building relationships with students and so on and so forth. This is the same for Melissa Boudreau. Melissa teaches our French language courses and French literature, and she's done a wonderful job of that. And so this slide speaks to what Melissa is doing in her language courses, using individual e-chats for video conferences. In Nova Scotia Virtual School, just like we're using FeedLoop today, or you might be using Google Meet, Nova Scotia Virtual School uses Big Blue Button, similar to our homework hub for our senior high math students, and perhaps all of our math students now that I say that out loud. Our NSVS teachers, they choose a day of the week for each course where they do a 1 hour live session with their students, and then their other time throughout their week is spent online working with students as individuals, in small groups, in pairs, in larger groups, to address whatever needs they might have. Great time to build that relationship with the student, to make it meaningful to each individual, to interview them about where they are and where they stand. And in the case of language courses, to be able to have that language opportunity with the student, where in a large group setting, they may be a little more hesitant to do, but in a one-on-one or a small group setting in that online format, you can actually do some assessment of their language and their language development through the e-chat. Having them use recording devices. And again, in NSVS, we use Moodle, but there are so many devices out there now, so many opportunities that most students could do that with a phone and be able to upload that recording for you to be able to listen to. Of course, using rubrics to analyze the quality, always making sure that students know what the expectations of them are before they go into the assessment. It's key to know what, how you're going to be evaluated before you go into the evaluation. It's a great way to provide the audio samples and exemplars to your students as well. In the case of Melissa, she can speak directly into this, into the platform that she's using, or she can do a video and upload it later on. It's a great way to work on lessons for when you have a guest teacher in your classroom. In virtual school, our teachers, if they're out for a single day, we don't bring in a guest teacher, but if we're out for 3 or more days, then we do. So we have different ways to maneuver around that, and a little more flexibility within that in the virtual school, because things are done online. But it is a great opportunity to do that pre-recording and then upload it for that day. The students can continue on. And so there's, creating radio and TV commercials, all sorts of different opportunities that students can use. And again, they can work in pairs in the language development. It's a great opportunity to do that. They could be working solo, they could be working in a small group, whatever it might be. So Melissa speaks to how speaking language is key, and students aren't always comfortable about speaking French in front of others, and they're not always confident about the quality of their language. So having these online assessment opportunities, these one-off interviews, those are a great way to build that within the classroom. And then what about math science? I've heard people say, it's hard to do a science assessment online. Well, it's definitely doable. So Nathan Cormier, again, working from Straight, he talks about similar things that we've done with our correspondence days, where you can have students online, leave the camera on so the students know that you're there, but turn the microphone off to avoid those distractions. So have them working in that online format. You could have 3 or 4 doing an assessment at once. You could have a larger group doing them as well, depending on what the assessment is. But if it's something that you need to spend closer attention to, we've done as many as 4 on a screen at one time in that sense. Again, making sure that your expectations for the assessment are clear, and understanding that sometimes there's going to be troubles, just like with any technology. It doesn't always work the way you want it to when you want it to. So helping students to problem solve, helping students to get set up, doing all of those things that we would do in a classroom as well when the student comes in, right? Being flexible, working with them. And as he pointed out, Google Forms has a test mode that can lock students into one tab, so you don't have to worry about whether they're finding answers on another website, whatever it might be. Moodle has an opportunity within their testing platforms to do regular screenshots as students are working through their assessment. And as it does those screenshots, it records the student into a smaller kind of video format to let you know that you can watch and see what's going on. And again, it could be as simple as having it set up and having some time to the contact teacher within the school could be able to do that for you as well, right? So there's lots of ways to work around it and to make sure that everything is there. Does it guarantee a perfect environment? No. Is there going to be a student who has some dishonest work? Probably. There are finding ways to create your assessment in a manner that allows students to build progress and to develop with it, following the assessment policies, will eliminate a lot of that. If we're working with recall questions where students have to recall answers, And that's where we're sitting. Instead of the transfer of knowledge and the application and understanding of that knowledge, there's more likely to have dishonesty. Does that mean it will happen? No, it doesn't mean that that will happen. It's just easier for it to happen in that sense. So taking a close look at how that assessment tool has been created that allows students to work through applying their understanding, applying their knowledge, transferring it to a different opportunity rather than just retelling what they've had experience from. This is no different than being in a classroom and a face-to-face opportunity where there will be students who will find ways to, creative ways to access their exam or their final assessment in a different manner. So, no. All right. So seriously, what would you do? What would you be thinking about? What opportunities would you have to do this? How might you have already created an online assessment if you've already done that? Can you think of an assessment that you might have that you could easily transform? I'm going to leave the chat box open for a couple of moments to get some ideas back from others of how they've worked through these in their own opportunities. The silence is always challenging, but again, I just want to put that out there that it's understandable, but I am gonna give you a full 2 minutes to process, think about things. If you have a question, you can put it in there as well. Or again, would love to hear your ideas and how you might be able to adapt one of your own. So solid 2 minutes before I start speaking again. All right. So Jessica, yeah, group projects, definitely great way to do that. Google Slides, it's a great way to bring collaboration in. So if you have students, like we do with virtual school, we have students that are all across the province. So we could have a student working from Cape Breton on a similar document or a similar slide deck as somebody from Yarmouth. So Google has a great opportunity to bring that collaboration together and to be able to do those pieces. So definitely. And yes, Google Forms for quizzes, larger assessments, even for exit slips out of a lesson. Great way to do that. If you have any experience in Moodle, again, there's a multitude of opportunities in there, from close activities, fill in the blanks, or to multiple choice, to essay format style, to again create collaborative wikis that could be done in that. So there's all kinds of opportunity there. All right. I'll speak to the my post there in a moment. So one of the things that's big about online assessment or virtual assessment is that there are some do's and don'ts in that, right? You need to watch for limitations of the tools that you're using, okay? So that could be simply whether or not, let's say if you're using Google Forms, you know, how accessible is it to everyone? Is it going to meet the needs of every student that might have their own supports that they need? Think about timings on it. So a lot of times our assessments, we can keep them hidden and then activate them at a particular time and then lock them again afterwards. Think about those opportunities to lock or restrict access. Think about ways to, with our correspondence studies exams that we have currently, once a student has done that exam, I'm going to speak to, let's say, the Math 10 provincial exam. Quite often, students are not comfortable trying to do their math in the Google text box in our Google slide deck. And so we have opportunities where they can actually do that physically, paper, pencil, and then screenshot it and cast it back into the exam. So think about ways that you can do that. We've had other students who they blow me out of the water when it comes to what they can do with technology, and they're creating those graphs right in those text boxes. And I'm always fascinated because I've not made any attempt to do that, but I'm fascinated watching them do it because they can put everything right in there and they walk away from that exam with nary a paper in hand. So think about that limitation as well. Think about, you know, what students might need or how they might need to access things and what the limitation is. Because not everyone, like myself, I could not create a 4-quadrant graph within the text box of a math assessment, but it can be done. Make sure that you explicitly teach how to use the tools. You know, students may have had no access to Google Forms before, and it may feel very straightforward for us if we've been doing that. It may be something, again, if it's in Moodle, whatever it might be, make sure that they've had experience with how to use that tool and that they understand what you expect of them in using that tool as well. Ensure that the tools are available and working. It's happened. We've had, CSP has had assessments that all of a sudden when we go in, the student is in a poor area for service, or the tech doesn't work the way we expect it to. And we all know that depending on what kind of tech you're using, whether you're using a Chromebook, whether you're using a MacBook, whether you're using a Dell, whatever it might be that you're using, will impact how that assessment, that virtual assessment, is handled and is able to be accessed by the student, right? So for us, we know that when we do our Google Meets with our students that are using a Chromebook, sometimes we have difficulty getting them to share their screen. Fortunately, because it's a Google slide, we can actually be in the exam at the same time as the student. And so we can have them on screen virtually, and then on the other side of our screen, bring up their exam and actually be in the exam at the same time as them. So there are workarounds for many of those things, but just be aware of them as you're getting started, because you will hit some of those and need to problem solve how to get around that as you're working through it. And again, accept that there's going to be connectivity issues. There's going to be time constraints. There's going to be, you know, issues of availability between you and the students and what's going on. Sometimes you may need to restrict a certain assessment to a specific time period, where other times you may be able to leave it open and have them completed in the course of 3 or 4 days, whatever it might be. And you have to recognize that this shift from a traditional format is that it's a shift. It's a huge shift in thinking for many people, because the word exam conjures up a sense of what that might be. And so, you know, even sometimes moving from that final assessment or the word exam can be a huge shift for people, right? I worked with a principal at one time who believed that every course in every subject area needed to have a 2.5-hour exam. And that wasn't conducive to a couple of the subjects that I was teaching at the time. They were very hands-on courses, and so trying to find creative ways that met what my principal expected, along with what the students were familiar with in the classroom, became a bit of a challenge. But we were able to work around that and to get there. So we had that opportunity. So just some do's and don'ts, things to consider as you're thinking about virtual assessments. The positives, lots of them. Again, you have access to tools that students may not have in a paper pencil format, right? So now every student has the opportunity to have accessibility to voice to text or text to voice. And it's, no one student is standing out as having access that is different than others. So it's a part of that accessibility piece, part of the universal design, creating assessments that meet the needs of all learners. Design is kind of dependent on the time you want to put into it. So whether you want to do something, a quick exit card for the end and you use a Google form, or whether you want to come up with an elaborative wiki yourself that allows students to work through whatever the task might be that you're asking them to do to show their understanding. It truly is the limit to your design. And you have that opportunity to do that ahead of time and then to be able to reuse that and to redevelop it. And you have it stored online where you have it accessible yourself as well. Virtual assessments really focus on skill development, right? It's an opportunity to truly bring that focus into what skills they're using, not only with their technology, but within their course. Virtual assessments, in order to, as we spoke earlier, as I alluded to earlier, in order for them to kind of meet the needs of looking at actionable items and what students are transferring their knowledge to, it allows students to move beyond just recall questions, right? It allows students to get up into questions of investigation and evaluating things and assessing whatever it might be and being able to apply all of that on a higher level. Virtual assessments are definitely environmentally friendly and economical. Unless you're looking for specific programming that you want to use that might cost a little bit. Ultimately, you have access to all of the Google Suite and many other tools online that you may be able to use to incorporate within your course. It could be as simple as a Kahoot opportunity to do some refresh. You have a potentially quick turnaround time in the feedback and grading. Again, there's a lot of upfront work to creating a virtual assessment, but in the case with our correspondence studies exams, previous practice prior to COVID, students would make their application to do their assessment. By the time they emailed that or scanned that into us, whatever it might be, then we had to actually send a physical copy of that exam off to whoever was supervising. So we needed a week to 2 weeks to make sure that that happened. Then that physical exam was mailed back to us or shipped back to us. And then it was then sent off to a marker for grading. So the whole process for a correspondence could take as little as 2 weeks, depending on how things worked out. It could take as much as 4 or 5 weeks for that process to happen. But now with virtual exams, everything's right there, and you can carry it with you wherever you want because it's just a matter of having your laptop or access to that Google Drive or whatever it is that you're working within, whatever platform. And so for correspondence studies, our exams went from a 4-week process to a 24-hour process. And that's timely for students. That's great for their success because they're getting their feedback and grading immediately as possible. And for many of our markers, it actually happens in the same day. So our exams, a link to our exam is sent to the marker, the marker goes in and grades the exam and sends the feedback to the student immediately. So it has really lessened our time to have to, that it took to be able to reach our students, which is very important in our assessment. Timely feedback is essential to learning. Highly secure, definitely. You can set all of the settings on there. So in our Google Slides, we have them set so that they're not shareable with anybody else. They're not downloadable. They're not printable, unless we have specific access, or unless a student has specifically asked to have it printed in a print copy for them. And then we can do that because we can change those settings. We can actually make copies of everything so that we have our original copy, and then we give the marker a copy of the exam to grade and feedback, so that we don't have to worry about things happening. While Google tracks all that history, we don't have to worry about that original changing. So we actually have dual copies of it, and we're storing them in cyberspace rather than in a filing cabinet in our office. So again, easy to use, and you have the potential for auto grading depending on what you're using. So if you're using some of the tools in Moodle, you can set it up so that your grades are automatically sent back to the student as soon as they complete the quiz or the assessment, or whatever it is that they might be working on. So it's very pertinent to the student to have that timely feedback and that great grading system. And so you can have that all set up ahead of time so that can happen. And then you have, that time to do other things. And all of this can happen within the school day as well. But certainly if there are certain circumstances that you're working with, that you may allow students to do that in the evening or on the weekend, and you can come back to it in your own classroom time. It doesn't mean that you have to be working through the evenings on grading them either. So there's opportunity within that as well. So just like I said, this slide deck will be uploaded to the Google Drive. There are definitely some great resources out there. Assessment, instruction, and feedback for learning, professional judgment and evidence of learning, the assessment learning from home document. Those are some of our provincial resources for use. If you're looking to create your first Google slide assessment, let me know. I'm happy to go online with you, set up a Google Meet, and walk you through how to do that. And you can create. I'll help you create one. I'll help you work through getting one going, and figuring out what works best for you and what the tools are within the Google slide deck that will allow you to do that. So that's certainly all part of the plan, and happy to do that. Just send me an email. I'll put my email in the chat as well. There we go, Angela Sanford at novascotia.ca. And just above that is the link to the Google Drive folder, where you will, after this session, this will be uploaded into that, along with a couple of other documents from Nathan and Melissa that speak to using virtual assessments in their language classroom and in the math science classroom. So that's there. And then the key piece, again, connecting with students online, an excellent resource tool for anybody who's interested. Jennifer Saravallo has some wonderful pieces about virtual learning. And it focuses on teachers who have not had experience in virtual learning. So not our Nova Scotia virtual school teachers, but more for teachers who were kind of thrown into that platform when COVID hit. So, and the key to it is focusing on pedagogy, not on the medium. There's all kinds of opportunity to move forward in virtual learning platforms and virtual assessments, whatever it might be. Focus on what the key targets are that you want your students to be know, show, and do, and how they can transfer that knowledge into new and creative means. Having said that, I'm going to end with one last slide that speaks directly from a student from our virtual school. A student who has taken courses with us for the last 2 years through the virtual school programming. Different teachers, actually probably 3 or 4 different teachers in the courses that the student has participated in. So 2 years ago, 2 school years ago, or is 2020, the student would have experienced online exams, working from home, but not so much in a virtual format, just more of a different format, kind of that same exam tool and trying to figure out how to access it and where to get into it. This spring, as I spoke earlier, we found a new way to create those virtual assessments and creative ways to do some of those as well. And this was the direct quote that this student sent back to the teacher. I studied for the case studies, exactly how I would have studied for an exam. But I found applying what I learned to the case studies to be more practical and meaningful. It was more enjoyable to use and connect topics and ideas rather than just restate what I could remember from the modules onto a piece of paper. And so the exam in this course prior to this year was a 2-hour exam, and very much multiple choice questions, short answer questions, direct questions from coursework. In moving to a new format, the teacher chose to create, I think there were 3 case studies on the final assessment, and the students had to choose 2 and reply to 2 of them in whatever format they wanted to. It could have taken the form of a slide deck, it could have taken the form of an essay, a photo story, a podcast, whatever you wanted. And the overwhelming feedback to the case studies in the new format was very positive. And so for someone who was hesitant in moving to this virtual assessment tool, found that she got more out of her students and they enjoyed it better as well and felt that they were actually applying their understanding and their learning. And so it was very successful all the way around. So just wanted to leave you with that positive tail end note. So having said that, again, I'll upload this to the Google Drive and it'll be there. But otherwise, if you have any questions or anything, then whoops, just let me know. And we've got about 7 minutes left before the presentation kind of ends, but I just want to leave it at that and leave it for you. If there's any questions you have, any comments, anything I can help you with, whatever it might be, just let me know. Otherwise, have a great afternoon and a great summer, and all the best in your virtual assessments going forward.